The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning in October, 1946, postmarked Berlin, addressed to a girl who didn't know she had another name. If Anna Hartley had ignored it, thrown it away with the coffee grounds and yesterday's news, her life would have remained exactly what it seemed: safe, American, ordinary. She found it wedged between the radiator and the mail slot of her tiny Brooklyn apartment, the paper already warped from steam heat. Her fingers trembled as she turned it over. No return address. Just her name, or what she thought was her name, written in careful block letters that looked like they'd been formed by someone relearning how to hold a pen. Inside, 3 sentences in German. Anna didn't speak German. She took the letter to Mrs. Steinberg downstairs, the widow who still kept a photograph of her Hamburg childhood on the mantel. The old woman's face went pale as she read, her lips moving soundlessly. When she finally looked up, her eyes were wet. It says your real name is Anneliese Vogel. It says you were taken from Ravensbrück camp in 1945, and it says the man who raised you. Mrs. Steinberg's voice cracked. It says he's the one who killed your parents. Anna's father, Captain Thomas Hartley, decorated war hero, the man who taught her to ride a bicycle and tucked her in every night, had returned from Germany 18 months ago with a 6-year-old girl he claimed was an orphan he'd rescued. The adoption papers were rushed through military channels. Nobody asked questions. Heroes didn't have to explain their kindness. But the letter changed everything. Anna had always known something was wrong with her memories. She'd wake from dreams where strange hands pulled her from her mother's arms, where cold metal pressed against her temple, where a man's voice, familiar, American, gentle, told her in broken German that everything would be fine now, that she was safe, that she would forget. And she had forgotten. Almost everything, the twist. Until 3 nights ago, when her father came home drunk and called her by a name she'd never heard. Anneliese, he'd whispered, gripping her shoulders too tight. I'm so sorry, Anneliese. Before we go further, pause for just a moment and tell us in the comments, where are you watching from, and what time is it where you are? If this story grips you the way it's gripping Anna right now, hit that like button and subscribe. You'll want to see how this unfolds. Anna stared at the letter until the words blurred. Mrs. Steinberg sat beside her, one weathered hand on Anna's knee, saying nothing because there was nothing to say. The radiator hissed. Outside, children played stickball in the street, their voices bright and careless. I need to go back, Anna said finally. To Germany? To find out what he did. Mrs. Steinberg closed her eyes. Child, some doors should stay closed. But Anna was already standing, already moving toward the small desk where she kept her savings, $217, earned from night shifts at the garment factory. Enough, maybe, for passage on a cargo ship. Enough to buy the truth. She knew her father kept a locked footlocker in the basement. She'd seen him carry it down the day they moved into this building, heard him check the padlock every Sunday like clockwork. She'd never asked what was inside. Now she would find out. That night, while Captain Hartley worked the graveyard shift at the shipyard, his new job, far beneath his rank, but all he could manage since the nightmares started, Anna descended the basement stairs with a crowbar and a flashlight. The footlocker was military issue, olive drab, stamped with his service number. The lock snapped on the second try. Inside, a German Luger pistol still loaded. A journal filled with dates and names, all in her father's precise handwriting. Photographs of emaciated prisoners behind barbed wire. And at the very bottom, wrapped in oilcloth, 2 identity cards bearing the name Vogel. Her parents' faces stared up at her from the grainy photographs. Her mother's eyes, Anna's eyes, looked directly at the camera with a defiance that made Anna's chest ache. On the back of her mother's card, in English, interrogated March 12, 1945. No useful intelligence. Disposed. The word disposed was underlined twice. Anna's hands wouldn't stop shaking. She photographed everything with the Brownie camera Mrs. Steinberg had lent her, her tears blurring the viewfinder. She rewrapped the items exactly as she'd found them, replaced the broken lock with one that looked identical, and climbed back upstairs as dawn broke over Brooklyn. By the time her father came home at 7, smelling of grease and salt water, Anna had already purchased her ticket. A cargo steamer leaving in 4 days, bound for Hamburg with stops in Southampton and Rotterdam. "Morning, sweetheart," he said, kissing the top of her head like he always did. His hands, large, capable, gentle, rested briefly on her shoulders. The same hands that had signed her parents' death warrant. "Morning, Dad," Anna replied, her voice steady. She would let him believe nothing had changed. She would pack in secret, leave a note, and be gone before he understood what she'd discovered. Because if he knew she was going back, if he suspected she remembered or was starting to, she wasn't sure what he might do to keep his secret buried. The letter had opened a door Anna couldn't close, and somewhere in the ruins of Berlin, someone was waiting to tell her the rest of the story. Someone who knew exactly what Captain Thomas Hartley had done in the name of liberation. Someone who had been there when her parents died. The Atlantic in late October is a living thing, gray and restless, indifferent to the cargo it carries. Anna spent most of the crossing below decks in a windowless cabin she shared with 2 Polish women returning to search for family, learning just how far mercy can stretch before it breaks. The ship, a converted Liberty vessel named the Steadfast Hope, rolled and pitched through 12 days of autumn storms. Anna's bunkmate, a woman named Katarzyna who'd survived Auschwitz, noticed the way Anna clutched the oilcloth package at night, how she whispered names in her sleep. "You're going back to find someone," Katarzyna said on the 5th night, when neither of them could sleep through the groaning hull. It wasn't a question. Anna nodded in the darkness. "Dead or alive?" "I don't know yet." Katarzyna was quiet for a long moment, listening to the Atlantic throw itself against the steel plates. "The dead are easier," she finally said. "The living have to remember." Anna had brought everything from the footlocker, the journal, the photographs, the identity cards. She'd memorized her father's handwriting, the way his letters tilted right when he was tired, the shorthand he used for locations. RV appeared 17 times. It took her 3 days to realize it meant Ravensbrück. The journal entries were clinical, detached. March 11, 1945. Arrived RV camp for intelligence assessment. Soviet advance imminent. Orders. Extract information. Resistance networks, partisan connections. Timeline, 48 hours. March 12th, subject Vogel, Matthias, uncooperative. Applied standard interrogation protocols. Expired 1430. Subject Vogel, Helene, witnessed husband's interrogation. Became compliant. Provided names, locations. Child present throughout. Subject's compliance motivated by child's welfare. March 13th. Subject Helene Vogel, no longer valuable. Disposed as per standing orders. Child, female, approx. And 5 years. Shows signs of trauma-induced amnesia. Recommend removal to U.S. adoption program. Personal request submitted. The clinical language made it worse somehow. Disposed. Like throwing away trash. Like her mother's life and the information she'd given to save Anna meant nothing once extracted. But one detail caught Anna's attention, underlined in the margin beside the March 13th entry. Witness, Nurse E. Schmidt. Requested silence. Agreed. A witness. Someone who'd been there. Someone who might still be alive. The ship docked in Hamburg on November 2nd, 1946, under skies the color of wet concrete. The city was a moonscape. Mountains of rubble where neighborhoods had been. Children playing in bomb craters. Women forming human chains to pass bricks for clearing. The smell hit Anna before she saw the devastation. Ash, mildew, sewage, and something sweet-rotten she couldn't identify. Katarzyna took one look at Anna's face and squeezed her hand. "This is what mercy looks like," she said, "when it arrives too late." Anna had an address, the one from the original letter. She'd traced it on a salvaged map at the Brooklyn Public Library, a street in the Kreuzberg district that might not exist anymore, a building that might be rubble, a person who might be dead. The recognition twist. When she finally found the address 3 hours later, navigating streets that no longer matched any map, she discovered it wasn't a residence at all. It was a makeshift clinic operating out of a partially collapsed hospital, its windows covered with oilcloth, its entrance marked only by a hand-painted red cross. And standing in the doorway, checking a young boy's temperature, was a woman in her 40s wearing a nurse's uniform so patched and repatched it looked like a quilt. The woman looked up as Anna approached. Their eyes met. The nurse's face went white. The thermometer slipped from her fingers, shattering on the cobblestones. "Anneliese?" she whispered. Anna nodded, unable to speak. "Mein Gott, you came back." Nurse Elizabeth Schmidt had been waiting 18 months for this moment. She'd sent the letter through a relief worker returning to New York. With no certainty it would arrive. No guarantee Anna would remember enough German to understand. No way of knowing if Captain Hartley would intercept it first. But she'd sent it anyway, because some truths demand witness. "I need to know what happened," Anna said in halting German, the words feeling strange in her mouth, like a language half-remembered from dreams. Elizabeth looked at the children playing in the rubble around them, at the patients waiting inside the clinic, at the gray Berlin sky that promised snow. "Not here," she said quietly. "Tonight. There's a place we can talk safely." She wrote an address on a scrap of paper, a cellar bar in the Soviet sector. Neutral ground, where German survivors and Allied soldiers both drank to forget. "Midnight," Elizabeth added. "Come alone. If anyone follows you, I won't be there." Anna tucked the paper into her pocket, feeling its weight like a stone. As she turned to leave, Elizabeth caught her arm. Her grip was surprisingly strong, her eyes intense. "Your mother," she said, her voice barely audible. Her last words were your name. Not a confession, not a plea, just your name, over and over, like a prayer. The words hit Anna like a fist to the chest. "She gave them everything they wanted," Elizabeth continued. "Every name, every location, every secret she knew, and she did it the moment your father," she spat the word, "the moment he put his pistol to your head and asked if she preferred to watch her daughter die or her husband." Anna couldn't breathe. The street tilted. "He made her choose," Elizabeth said, "and then he killed them both anyway." Around them, Hamburg continued its slow resurrection. Children laughing, women singing work songs as they cleared rubble, the sound of hammers rebuilding what bombs had destroyed. Life insisting on itself, despite everything. But Anna heard none of it. She heard only her mother's voice, speaking a name she'd almost forgotten, paying for her daughter's life with information that meant other mothers, other daughters, would die instead. What would you do if mercy demanded you become the monster? Tonight, in a cellar bar beneath the ruins, Anna would learn the rest, and she would discover that her father's crimes went far deeper than murder, that he'd built her entire American life on a foundation of calculated erasure, that every bedtime story and bicycle lesson had been designed to make her forget, that his love itself might be the cruelest lie of all. The snow began to fall as Anna walked back through the broken city, fat flakes settling on rubble and ruin alike, covering everything in temporary mercy. The bar had no name, just a door in a basement accessible only through a bombed-out bakery, and the password was a pack of American cigarettes. Anna arrived at 11:30, early enough to watch who came and went, late enough that the Soviet patrols had finished their rounds. The November cold had teeth now, and her breath came out in clouds as she navigated the Kreuzberg rubble by moonlight. Above ground, Berlin slept fitfully. Below, it remembered. The bouncer, a massive Russian with a scar bisecting his left eyebrow, took her cigarettes without comment and jerked his thumb toward the stairs. The descent was steep, the walls weeping moisture, and halfway down, Anna could hear it. Jazz music, American, playing on a phonograph that skipped every fourth beat. The smell rose to meet her. Tobacco, schnapps, unwashed bodies, and something else. Desperation, maybe. Or its opposite, the fierce determination to feel alive. The cellar had been a wine storage once. Now it held maybe 40 people crowded around tables made from doors laid across barrels, drinking whatever could be found, trading whatever could be traded. German civilians sat beside Soviet officers. British MPs shared cigarettes with former Wehrmacht soldiers. Everyone here had lost something. Everyone here wanted to forget. Anna spotted Elizabeth immediately. Corner table back to the wall, facing the entrance like someone who'd learned to always watch the exits. She'd changed from her nurse's uniform into civilian clothes that hung loose on her frame, and her hair was uncovered, showing the first threads of gray. "You came," Elizabeth said, as Anna slid into the opposite chair. "Did you think I wouldn't? I thought your father might stop you." Anna pulled out the oilcloth package, unwrapped it on the scarred table between them. The photographs, the journal, the identity cards, all the evidence of Captain Thomas Hartley's carefully documented sins. Elizabeth stared at the items like they were relics from an archaeological dig, artifacts from a civilization that had destroyed itself. Her fingers hovered over Helene Vogel's identity card, but didn't touch it, as if contact might burn. "You kept everything," Elizabeth whispered. "He kept everything. I just found it." A waiter, a boy no older than 14, brought 2 glasses of something clear that smelled like paint thinner. Elizabeth downed hers in one swallow. Anna left hers untouched. "Your father wasn't supposed to be at Ravensbrück," Elizabeth began, her voice low enough that Anna had to lean forward to hear over the music. "He was Army intelligence, attached to the 3rd Armored Division. They were racing the Soviets to Berlin, liberating camps as they went. But liberation wasn't the priority. Intelligence was." She pulled a cigarette from her pocket, lit it with shaking hands. The SS had destroyed most records before fleeing, but prisoners remembered names, faces, networks. Your father's orders were to identify resistance contacts, partisan collaborators, anyone who might be useful or dangerous in the coming occupation. He had 48 hours before the Red Army arrived. After that, any intelligence would belong to Stalin. The twist within the twist. But my parents weren't resistance fighters, Anna said. The identity cards list them as musicians. My father was a violinist. My mother sang. Elizabeth's smile was bitter. Your father was a violinist, one of the best in Berlin. But when the Reich started rounding up dissidents in 1941, someone needed to hide them. Your parents' apartment was above a music shop in Prenzlauer Berg. Storage rooms, hidden passages, perfect for moving people through the city. She tapped ash onto the floor. They saved 23 families, Jews mostly, but also communists, priests, anyone marked for transport. Your mother would sing at cabarets, memorize which SS officers drank too much, which ones could be bribed. Your father taught violin to their children, learned their schedules, their routines. They were never caught because they seemed so ordinary, just musicians trying to survive. Anna felt something shift inside her chest, like a locked door opening. But someone eventually informed. May 1944, Gestapo raided your apartment. Found evidence, forged papers, ration cards, a radio. Your parents fled with you to a safe house outside the city, but by then it was too late. The resistance network they'd built was compromised. They knew too much, knew too many names. So they went to Ravensbrück? They were sent there to be forgotten. Prisoners who weren't useful for labor went to that camp to die slowly or quickly, depending on the guards' moods. Your mother kept you alive by bribing guards with her voice. She'd sing for them, old German folk songs, and they'd give you extra bread, medicine when you got sick. Elizabeth's eyes went distant, seeing something Anna couldn't. I was a nurse there, conscripted from a teaching hospital in Munich. I wasn't SS, wasn't even a party member, but I was German, so I was responsible. I tried to help where I could. Extra morphine for the dying, falsified medical records to save those who could be saved. Your mother, she knew what I was doing. She never asked for help, but she'd sing certain songs as requests, codes, warnings. The phonograph skipped. Someone laughed too loud. When Captain Hartley arrived on March 11th, the camp was chaos. The SS were burning documents, executing prisoners, trying to hide evidence before the Soviets came. I was in the infirmary when his unit entered. He had a list, names of prisoners who might have intelligence value. Elizabeth ground out her cigarette. Your father's name was on that list. Matthias Vogel, resistance contact, possible ties to Soviet partisans. But Captain Hartley didn't want partisan intelligence. He wanted something else. Anna's stomach dropped. What? Leverage. Your father wasn't just a resistance contact. He was related to someone important. His brother, your uncle, was a physicist. Dr. Werner Vogel, working on rocket propulsion at Peenemünde. The Americans were desperate to grab German scientists before the Russians did. Operation Paperclip, they called it. Bring the rocket men to America, give them new names, new lives, ignore their crimes because their knowledge was valuable. The pieces clicked together with horrible clarity. Captain Hartley thought my father could help him find my uncle. Exactly. And when your father refused, when he said he'd rather die than help the Americans steal his brother, Captain Hartley decided to apply pressure. Elizabeth's voice went flat, emotionless, the way trauma sounds when it's been told too many times. He brought your mother into the interrogation room, made her watch. I was there. They needed a nurse present to keep your father conscious during questioning. Captain Hartley, he didn't use pliers or electricity like the SS did. He was surgical, precise. He knew exactly how much pain a body could endure before information became unreliable. Anna tasted bile. Your father lasted 4 hours, never said a word, just stared at your mother and whispered, "Forgive me," in German, over and over. He died at 14:30, March 12th, 1945. I signed the death certificate. The bar felt too hot, too close. Anna's vision tunneled. Then Captain Hartley brought you into the room. You were covered in lice, malnourished, terrified. You'd been hiding in the children's barracks, but someone told him where to find you. He sat you on a chair next to your father's body and asked your mother a simple question. "Where is Dr. Werner Vogel?" Elizabeth's hands were shaking now. Your mother looked at you, looked at what they'd done to your father, and she broke. Told him everything. Your uncle's last known location, the names of other scientists, safe houses, contacts, everything. She spoke for 30 minutes while you sat there, silent, in shock. And when she finished, Captain Hartley thanked her. Actually thanked her. Then he shot her in the head. The words hung in the smoke-thick air, point blank, while you watched. Then he turned to me and said, "The child goes into shock like this, she won't remember. Trauma does that. Make sure she stays quiet until I process the paperwork." He wanted you, Anna, not out of mercy, not out of guilt, but because you were proof, living proof of his interrogation success, his ability to break prisoners cleanly and efficiently. Anna's voice came out broken. And you helped him. What would you have done? The question wasn't rhetorical. Elizabeth's eyes burned with it. He had a gun. I had 20 other patients in the infirmary who would die without me. You were already broken, already orphaned. I told myself that going to America was better than staying in that hell. I told myself I was saving you. She leaned forward, urgent now. But I sent that letter because I was wrong. Because you deserved to know. Because Captain Hartley took you home and built a life around a lie. And somewhere in that man's guilt-soaked heart, he convinced himself he rescued you. That he gave you a better life. That his crime was somehow mercy. The jazz music swelled. Bodies pressed close. Someone was crying in the corner, soft Russian words Anna couldn't understand. "Did he find my uncle?" Anna asked. Operation Paperclip brought Werner Vogel to Fort Bliss, Texas in June 1945. He's working on missile guidance systems now. Living in a nice house with the American wife, American children, your father's sacrifice, your mother's betrayal. It bought your uncle a comfortable life building weapons for his former enemies. The weight of it crushed down. 3 lives destroyed so one scientist could trade sides. And Anna was the prize, the trophy, the living erasure of Captain Thomas Hartley's sins. "There's one more thing," Elizabeth said quietly. She reached into her coat and pulled out a small bundle wrapped in cloth. "Your mother, before they took her to the interrogation room, she gave this to me. Made me promise that if you survived, I'd keep it safe. I've carried it for 18 months, waiting." Anna unwrapped the cloth with trembling fingers. Inside, a small wooden bird, hand-carved, worn smooth from handling. The kind of toy a father might make for his daughter during long winter nights. The kind of thing a mother might clutch while her world ended. On the bottom, carved in tiny letters, Anneliese, geliebte Tochter, beloved daughter. Anna held her parents' last gift and finally allowed herself to weep. Around them, Berlin's survivors drank and danced and tried to forget. But some things, some truths, demand remembering. And Anna had just learned that mercy and cruelty can wear the same face, speak the same language, tuck you in at night, while building your life on the bones of everyone you loved. Dawn found Anna still sitting in the cellar bar. The carved wooden bird pressed against her palm until its wings left impressions in her skin. If grief has a sound, it's the silence between heartbeats. The moment when you realize the person you've been mourning isn't the person you lost, but the person you thought you were. Elizabeth had left at 3 a.m, pressing another address into Anna's hand before disappearing into the Soviet sector. "If you want the whole truth," she'd whispered, "you need to hear it from him." The address was in Texas, Fort Bliss, Dr. Werner Vogel's new American home. But first, Anna had unfinished business in Berlin. She found the Soviet records office at 8 o'clock, after walking the rubble-strewn streets for hours, watching the city wake to the work of rebuilding. The building had survived the bombing mostly intact. Ironic, since it had been a Gestapo headquarters before the Red Army claimed it. Now it held the fragmentary records of 3 empires. Nazi documentation the SS hadn't burned, Soviet intelligence files, and the scattered paperwork of occupation. The clerk was a young Russian lieutenant who spoke passable German and looked like he hadn't slept in a week. Anna showed him her mother's identity card. "I need to know if there are any other records. Testimony, witness statements, anything." The lieutenant studied the card, then Anna's face, making connections. "You're Helene Vogel's daughter." It wasn't a question. "How did you—" "There's a file, marked for review by American authorities. Someone requested it 6 months ago." He paused. "Captain Thomas Hartley, U.S. Army Intelligence." Anna's blood went cold. Her father knew she might come looking, had been preparing for it. "Can I see the file?" The lieutenant looked around the nearly empty office, weighing rules against something else. Pity, maybe, or simple human decency. "Wait here." He returned 20 minutes later with a thin folder stamped with both Soviet and American seals. Inside, transcripts of her mother's interrogation, typed in English with German translations. Medical reports signed by Elizabeth Schmidt. And photographs. Anna had to look away from those. Documentation of what happens to a body when information is extracted with surgical precision. But buried in the paperwork was something unexpected. A deposition, dated October 19th, 1946, 2 weeks ago. Signed by someone named Dmitry Volkov, former Soviet partisan. The testimony was brief, clinical. "I knew Matthias and Helene Vogel during occupation years 42 through 44. They provided safe passage for 17 Jewish families, 4 Soviet intelligence officers, and numerous political dissidents through Berlin underground network. Matthias Vogel was approached in spring 43 by his brother Werner, physicist at Peenemünde, who wished to defect to Soviet Union with rocket research. Matthias refused to facilitate contact, believing defection would endanger the entire resistance network. This decision created permanent rift between brothers. When Werner later approached American forces, Matthias considered it betrayal of highest order. He vowed never to speak Werner's name again. Anna read it 3 times, understanding shifting with each pass. Her father hadn't protected Werner. He'd refused to help him defect to the Soviets, and Werner had resented it enough to go to the Americans instead. The family was already broken before Captain Hartley arrived. The interrogation hadn't extracted information so much as exploited existing wounds. "There's more," the lieutenant said quietly, pulling another sheet from the file. "This came through Red Cross channels yesterday. I was supposed to forward it to American authorities, but—" he shrugged. "Bureaucracy is slow." The document was a letter, handwritten in German, addressed to whoever searches for the Vogel family truth. Anna recognized the handwriting from the original envelope. Elizabeth. I write this as insurance, in case I do not survive to tell what I witnessed. Captain Thomas Hartley was not a monster. This is important to understand. He was a good man who did monstrous things because war makes monsters of us all. After he shot Helene Vogel, he stood for 5 minutes staring at the body. I thought he would kill the child too, eliminate the witness. Instead, he knelt beside Annalisa and spoke to her in English, gentle words she couldn't understand. He wrapped her in his coat, carried her to the infirmary himself, stayed with her for 3 hours while I treated her malnutrition, her lice, her infected cuts. He sang to her American lullabies, held her while she screamed, while she shook, while the shock took her voice. And when she finally went silent, that terrible silence of a child who has witnessed too much, he whispered, I'll make this right. I'll give you a life they would have wanted. I'll be the father they can't be. I believe he meant it. I believe he convinced himself that raising her in America, erasing her trauma, building her a safe childhood. I believe he thought this was justice, redemption, love. But mercy built on murder is still murder, and love that requires erasure is not love at all. If Annalisa ever reads this, know. Your mother's last coherent words before the shot were tell her we loved her more than survival, more than secrets, more than everything. Your father's last words, hours before he died, were she will be braver than us both. They were right. Anna folded the letter with hands that barely functioned, her vision swimming. The lieutenant pretended not to notice her tears. Thank you, she managed. There's a flight to Frankfurt this afternoon, he said. U.S. military transport, civilian passengers allowed if you have the right paperwork. From Frankfurt, you can catch commercial service to New York, then Texas. He slid a travel authorization across the desk, already stamped and signed. How? I have a daughter, he said simply. In Stalingrad. I haven't seen her in 4 years. Don't know if I ever will. He tapped the authorization. Sometimes the rules exist to be broken. Grace arriving from unexpected sources. Anna made it to Tempelhof Airport by noon, the folder tucked inside her coat next to the wooden bird. The flight was delayed, weather over the Alps, so she sat in the terminal watching German families reunite, Soviet soldiers depart. The endless circulation of people trying to find their way home. She thought about her father, both fathers. Matthias, who'd chosen resistance over family safety, whose conviction cost him everything, and Thomas, who'd chosen her survival over his own soul, building her a childhood on foundations of calculated forgetting. Which one was right? Which one loved her better? Or was love always this complicated? This mixture of sacrifice and selfishness, nobility and harm? An announcement echoed through the terminal. Flight 307 to Frankfurt, now boarding. Anna stood, shouldering the small bag that held everything she owned. Her mother's identity card, her father's journal, Elizabeth's testimony, and a wooden bird carved by hands that would never hold her again. The recognition that mattered most. She was flying toward her uncle not for confrontation, but for answers. Werner Vogel had made choices too. Chosen American safety over Soviet ideology. Chosen to build weapons instead of resist them. Chosen silence over acknowledging the family destroyed for his freedom. She needed to understand if guilt kept him awake at night, or if he'd learned the same trick Captain Thomas Hartley mastered. The ability to love in the morning what you betrayed at midnight. As the plane lifted over Berlin's ruins, Anna pressed her face to the window, watching the broken city shrink below. Somewhere down there, Elizabeth was tending to patients in her makeshift clinic. The Soviet lieutenant was filing paperwork, helping one daughter reach the truth. Katarzyna was probably searching for her own lost family in the Polish countryside. They were all trying to rebuild something from the rubble. The question was whether you could build on a foundation of lies, or if eventually the weight of truth collapsed everything. Anna had traveled 3,000 miles to find her past. Now she had another 1,000 to go, to confront the man whose freedom cost her parents their lives. And then she would return to Brooklyn and face the hardest question of all. What to do with a father who loved her enough to destroy her, who saved her by erasing everything she'd been, who tucked her in every night while hiding the blood on his hands. Some debts can never be repaid. Some crimes can never be forgiven. But sometimes, understanding is the only mercy left. El Paso heat in November feels like a punishment designed for those who thought they'd escaped winter. And Anna stepped off the bus into sunshine so bright, it bleached the color from everything. Fort Bliss sprawled across the desert like a small city. Barracks, laboratories, housing developments where German scientists lived with their new American families, building the future while trying to forget the past. Anna had the address memorized. 17 Alameda Drive, a street lined with identical ranch houses painted optimistic pastels, each with a small lawn fighting against the Texas dust. Number 17 was pale yellow with white trim, a tricycle abandoned in the driveway, and the sound of children's laughter drifting through an open window. Anna stood on the sidewalk for 10 minutes, watching. A woman, blonde, young, American, appeared briefly at the window, smiling at something inside. Then a man's silhouette, tall and thin, lifting a small child onto his shoulders. The mundane geometry of happiness, built on a foundation Anna could see too clearly now. She knocked at 2:30 in the afternoon, when the desert heat made thinking difficult and defenses were low. The woman who answered had kind eyes and a toddler balanced on her hip. "Can I help you?" "I'm looking for Dr. Werner Vogel. Anna paused, choosing her words carefully. "I'm family, from Germany." The woman's smile faltered slightly. "Werner doesn't talk much about Germany. Are you sure you have the right address?" "I'm his niece, Anneliese Vogel." The woman's face went pale. The toddler squirmed, sensing tension. From inside the house, a man's voice called in German-accented English. "Sarah? Who is it?" "It's..." Sarah looked at Anna with something like pity. "It's someone from before." Werner Vogel appeared in the doorway, and Anna understood immediately why her father had admired him. He had the same intelligent eyes, the same long fingers meant for precise work, whether violin strings or missile calculations. But where Matthias had chosen resistance, Werner wore the comfortable guilt of survival like a well-tailored suit. He recognized her instantly. The blood drained from his face. "Anneliese." Not a question, a statement of terrible fact. "May I come in?" He looked at his wife, his American child, the life he'd constructed from the ruins of his principles. Then he nodded, stepping aside. The house was achingly normal. Comfortable furniture, children's toys, photographs on the mantel showing Werner receiving awards, shaking hands with military officers, standing beside rockets that pointed toward the sky with cold precision. Not a single photograph from Germany. Not one image from before. Sarah took the toddler to another room, sensing this conversation required privacy. Werner gestured to the couch, but neither of them sat. They stood in the living room like boxers waiting for the bell, and the air between them crackled with 18 months of silence. "I went to Berlin," Anna said. "I found the records, talked to the nurse who was there, read the transcripts of what happened to my parents." Werner closed his eyes. "I didn't know. Not until after the war, when I was already here. They told me Matthias and Helene died in the bombing. I wanted to believe. You wanted to believe the lie because it was easier than the truth." "Yes." The admission came out broken. "Yes." He moved to the window, staring at the desert. "Your father and we stopped speaking in 1943. I discovered something at Peenemünde, guidance system calculations that could change everything. I knew Germany was losing, knew the rockets would be turned against civilians, knew I was building terror weapons. So I approached Matthias, asked him to help me defect to the Soviets." Werner's reflection in the glass looked haunted. He refused, said my defection would draw Gestapo attention to his network, put dozens of families at risk. We argued. Terrible things were said. He called me a coward for wanting to trade sides instead of resisting both. I called him a fool for choosing strangers over family. "So you went to the Americans instead?" "I approached them in March 1945, offered my research in exchange for asylum. They were very interested. Asked about my family, my connections, whether I knew any resistance members who might have Soviet contacts." He turned to face Anna. "I never mentioned your parents. Never gave Captain Hartley their names. You have to believe that." "Then how?" "The Americans already had intelligence from other sources. They'd been tracking resistance networks for months, planning the occupation. When they learned I had a brother in Berlin with partisan connections, they saw an opportunity. Standard interrogation procedure. Break the family member. Get leverage on the scientist." Werner's voice cracked. "I didn't know until October. I was at a security briefing, reviewing captured Nazi records for names of other scientists we could recruit. And there in a casualty list from Ravensbrück, I saw their names. Matthias and Helene Vogel. Died March 1945 during American interrogation." He sat down heavily, all the strength leaving him. "I requested the full file, read the transcripts, learned what they'd suffered because I wanted to defect, because I'd mentioned I had a brother in Berlin, because I couldn't stand the guilt of building weapons but was too weak to actually resist." Anna pulled out the wooden bird, set it on the coffee table between them. "My mother gave this to a nurse before they killed her. It's the only thing I have left of them." Werner stared at the carved bird like it was a grenade. "Matthias made that. He carved birds for you every birthday. Robins, sparrows, eagles. You had a whole collection. You used to line them up on your windowsill and tell them stories." The detail hit Anna like a physical blow, a memory she hadn't known, she'd lost. "What happened to me?" she whispered. "After the interrogation, before the adoption. There are 3 weeks missing from the records." Werner stood, went to a cabinet, pulled out a folder Anna recognized. Army intelligence marked classified, stamped with dates from April 1945. "I stole this last month, from the personnel files at the base. It's Captain Hartley's psych evaluation, conducted after he returned from Germany." He handed it to Anna. The psychiatrist's notes were clinical. Captain Hartley displays symptoms consistent with acute stress reaction following interrogation duties at Ravensbrück camp. Reports difficulty sleeping, intrusive memories, emotional attachment to German orphan child he's petitioned to adopt. When questioned about interrogation methods, becomes defensive and insists subject deaths were necessary for intelligence gathering. However, his subsequent actions, staying with the child for 3 weeks, personally arranging medical care, learning German lullabies to comfort her, suggest significant guilt response. Assessment. Captain Hartley is attempting to transform his guilt into redemption through adoption. He genuinely believes giving this child an American life will somehow atone for her parents' deaths. Recommend approval of adoption petition with mandatory follow-up counseling, which patient will likely refuse. Prognosis. He will either drink himself to death within 5 years, or he will convince himself he's done the right thing and live with a manageable level of compartmentalized guilt. Either way, the child will grow up loved, but built on a lie. Anna's hands shook holding the paper. He stayed with me for 3 weeks. According to the file, you stopped speaking for 17 days. Complete selective mutism. He slept in the infirmary, held you during nightmares, sang to you in German even though he barely knew the language. The nurses said he was trying to become what he'd destroyed. The twist that changes everything. There's one more thing, Werner said quietly. Something that's not in any file because I only learned it last week. I have a colleague here, Dr. Hans Müller, another paperclip scientist. He was at Peenemünde when the Americans came. He told me that Captain Hartley wasn't supposed to interrogate your parents at all. Anna looked up sharply. Hartley volunteered. He'd been assigned to process prisoners for Soviet handover. But when he saw your parents' names on the intelligence list, saw they were related to me, he specifically requested permission to conduct the interrogation himself. His commanding officer warned him it was poor strategy, too personal, too much emotional investment in the outcome. But Hartley insisted. Werner's voice dropped to a whisper. He chose to interrogate them, Anna. Chose to be the one to break them. And I think, God help me, I think he did it because he knew what it would cost him. Because he wanted to punish himself by becoming the monster. Because if he was going to help smuggle Nazi scientists to America and call it justice, he needed to destroy something good first, to prove he could, to prove he was already beyond redemption. The room spun. Everything Anna thought she understood tilted. He killed them on purpose, not for intelligence, for his own guilt. I think so, yes. And then he took you to punish himself further. To live every day with the evidence of what he'd done, to love you as penance. Anna stood, her body moving without conscious thought. She walked to the mantel, looked at the photographs of Werner's American life, the happy family, the scientific awards, the careful erasure of everything before. What would you have done? She asked, echoing Elizabeth's question from the Berlin cellar. If you'd known what your defection would cost them? Werner didn't hesitate. I would have done it anyway, because I'm a coward, because I chose survival over principle, comfort over honor, because I'm exactly what Matthias said I was, someone who'd rather build weapons for former enemies than die resisting current ones. The brutal honesty of it landed like a confession. But you, Werner continued, you're asking the wrong question. The question isn't what I would have done. It's what you're going to do now. Captain Hartley is in Brooklyn, living with what he did. You could destroy him, turn the evidence over to military authorities, expose his crimes, put him in prison for war crimes. He looked at Anna with eyes that understood damnation intimately. Or you could go home and let him keep loving you while drowning in his guilt. Which punishment is worse? Outside, children played in the desert heat. Sarah sang something in the kitchen, the melody sweet and uncomplicated. The toddler laughed at something only toddlers find funny. Life insisting on itself, despite everything. Anna picked up the wooden bird, held it to the light. Her father's hands, her real father's hands, had carved these wings, had spent hours in a freezing apartment making toys for a daughter who would forget his face, his voice, his sacrifice. And Captain Hartley's hands, the hands that pulled the trigger, had held her through nightmares, had learned German lullabies, had built her a childhood from the ruins of the one he'd destroyed. Which hands were more guilty? Which love was more real? "I'm going home," Anna said finally. "But first I need you to tell me everything you remember about them. Their voices, their habits, the way they laughed. I need you to help me remember what he tried to make me forget." Werner nodded, tears finally falling. "It will take all night. I have time." And so, in a yellow house in the Texas desert, a weapons maker and an orphan sat together and rebuilt a family from memory, piece by painful piece, until the past became something more than absence, and forgiveness became at least a possibility, if not yet a certainty. Brooklyn in December smelled like coal smoke and coming snow, and Anna stood across the street from her apartment building for 20 minutes before she found the courage to cross. 3 weeks she'd been gone. 3 weeks that felt like 3 lifetimes, and the windows of her second-floor apartment glowed with warm light, promising comfort she no longer believed she deserved. She could see him through the gap in the curtains, Captain Thomas Hartley sitting at the kitchen table with his head in his hands, a bottle of whiskey at his elbow. He looked smaller than she remembered, hollowed out, like something essential had been carved away and left a shell behind. Mrs. Steinberg met her at the building entrance, relief and worry warring on her weathered face. "Thank God. Oh, child, he's been destroyed. Hasn't gone to work, barely eats, just sits up there waiting." "Did he call the police?" "No. He told me you'd come back when you were ready, that you'd learned something you needed to know." Mrs. Steinberg gripped Anna's hands. "What did you learn?" "Everything. Nothing. I don't know anymore." Anna climbed the stairs slowly, each step a negotiation between rage and grief, between the daughter who'd been loved and the daughter who'd been erased. At the door, she paused, her hand on the knob, gathering the pieces of herself into something resembling courage. She didn't knock, just entered. Hartley looked up from the table and the expression on his face nearly broke her. Hope and terror and something that looked like relief that the waiting was finally over. "Anna." His voice was rough, unused. "You came back." "I went to Berlin, met the nurse, read the transcripts, flew to Texas and talked to my uncle." She set her bag on the floor, pulled out the folder of evidence. "I know what you did, all of it." Hartley stood slowly, swaying slightly, whether from whiskey or weakness Anna couldn't tell. He looked at the folder like it was a death sentence, which maybe it was. "Good," he said quietly. "That's good. You should know." The response surprised her. She'd expected denial, justification, the careful compartmentalization the psychiatrist had predicted. Not this raw acceptance. "Why?" The question came out broken. "Why did you volunteer to interrogate them? Why did you choose to destroy them when you could have let someone else?" "Because I was already destroyed." Hartley moved to the window, his back to her, shoulders hunched under the weight of confession. By March 1945, I'd been conducting interrogations for 8 months, extracting intelligence from prisoners who'd been tortured by the SS, trying to get useful information before the Soviets arrived. I'd become very good at it. He pressed his forehead against the cold glass. The army called it intelligence gathering. I called it necessary. But at night, I'd lie awake hearing their screams, seeing their faces, knowing I'd crossed a line I could never uncross. I was drinking a fifth of whiskey a day just to sleep. My commanding officer said I needed rest, rotation back to a desk job. But then your parents' names came through on a priority list. And you saw an opportunity. I saw a test. He turned to face her, and his eyes were red-rimmed, devastated. I wanted to know if I was still human. If I could look at two good people, musicians, resistance fighters, actual heroes, and still do what needed to be done. If I could break them and feel nothing, then I'd know I was past saving. That I'd become the thing I was supposed to be fighting. Anna felt something shift in her chest, understanding arriving like a blade. But you didn't feel nothing. I felt everything. The words came out raw. Your father, Matthias, he never screamed, never begged, just looked at me with these eyes that said, "You know this is wrong, and you're doing it anyway, which makes you worse than the ones who don't know better." And he was right. Hartley grabbed the whiskey bottle, took a long pull, hands shaking. When he died, I felt relief. Thought maybe I could stop, write it up as interrogation failure, move on. But my commanding officer was there watching, and he said, "What about the wife?" And I knew. I knew if I stopped, if I showed weakness, they'd pull me from intelligence work, send me home. And I'd convinced myself that the intelligence I gathered saved lives, that my sins had purpose. So you broke my mother. I brought you into that room. His voice cracked completely. I put you in a chair next to your father's body, and I put my pistol to your head, and I asked her if she preferred to watch another death or cooperate. And he sobbed once, a harsh animal sound. She looked at you with such love, such absolute love, and she told me everything. The confession hung between them like smoke. The information she gave me was useless. Werner had already defected to American control. The resistance networks were already compromised. Nothing she said saved a single life or changed a single outcome. She died for nothing. Why didn't you let her live? Anna's voice was barely a whisper. You had what you wanted. Because my commanding officer was still watching. Because letting her live meant explaining why I deviated from protocol. Because I was a coward. He met her eyes finally, unflinching. And because some part of me, some sick, broken part, wanted to finish the job, to prove I could destroy something good and keep living, to see if I was fully damned yet. The karmic moment. Anna pulled out her mother's identity card, set it on the table between them. Elizabeth Schmidt wrote that you held me for 3 weeks, that you learned German lullabies, that you convinced yourself that adoption was redemption. It was never redemption. It was penance. Hartley sank into his chair, boneless, defeated. Every morning I wake up and see your face, Helene's face, Matthias's eyes, and remember what I destroyed. Every time you call me Dad, it's a knife in my chest. Every birthday, every Christmas, every moment of happiness I've given you has been built on their bones. He looked up at her with naked desperation. But I love you. God help me. I love you more than anything in this world. I taught myself German, learned the lullabies your mother sang, tried to give you the childhood they would have wanted. I know it doesn't matter. I know it doesn't make it right. But it's the only thing I had left that was real. Anna stood in the kitchen of the man who'd killed her parents and raised her with gentleness, and felt the terrible weight of impossible choices pressing down. This was the confrontation she'd traveled 4,000 miles for, the moment of justice, of punishment, of karmic balance. She could destroy him, turn the evidence over to the military, to the newspapers, watch him be court-martialed and imprisoned for war crimes. Let the world know what Captain Thomas Hartley had done in the name of intelligence gathering, how he'd murdered innocents and adopted their daughter as penance. Or she could walk away, leave the evidence on the table, pack her things, and let him live with his guilt in this apartment that had become his prison, where every photograph on the mantel was a reminder of the family he'd destroyed to create a family. But there was a third option, one she hadn't considered until this moment. Understanding without forgiveness, truth without redemption, acknowledgement that some crimes are too large for any punishment to fit. My mother's last words, Anna said quietly, according to Elizabeth, were, "Tell her we loved her more than survival, more than secrets, more than everything." My father's last words were, "She will be braver than us both." Hartley closed his eyes, tears streaming. They didn't know you'd adopt me. Didn't know I'd grow up safe, fed, loved in the ways you knew how to love. They died believing I'd die too, or end up in some orphanage, broken and forgotten. She pulled the wooden bird from her pocket, held it in the lamplight. But I didn't die, and I wasn't forgotten. And some part of that, some small, terrible part, is because you felt guilty enough to stay. To hold a traumatized child through nightmares instead of handing her off to an orphanage and moving on with your career. To destroy your own life trying to rebuild mine. Anna, I'm not forgiving you. The words came out firm, certain. What you did is unforgivable. You murdered two good people, orphaned a child, and built your redemption on their corpses. That's the truth. And the truth doesn't change because you felt bad about it. She set the wooden bird on the table next to her mother's identity card. But I'm not destroying you either. Because they loved me enough to break, to betray their principles, to give up everything for the chance I might survive. And you, in your sick, guilty way, loved me enough to break yourself trying to make it mean something. Hartley looked up, confused, desperate for any scrap of mercy. I'm leaving, Anna said. I'm going to take my mother's identity card and my father's bird, and I'm going to build a life that honors them, not you, not the lie you created, but the truth of who they were and what they sacrificed. She moved toward the door, picking up her bag. But every year on March 12th, the day they died, I'm going to come back. I'm going to sit in this kitchen, and you're going to tell me everything you remember about that day. Every detail, every moment, every choice, and you're going to live with it. That's your punishment. Not prison, not exposure, but remembering forever, with the only witness who matters. Hartley stood, swaying, his face a mask of devastation and relief and something that might have been gratitude. And on March 13th, the day you adopted me, I'm going to light a candle for the parents I lost and the father I gained, and I'm going to hold both truths at once, because that's what it means to survive what you did to me. She reached the door, paused with her hand on the knob. I'll never call you Dad again. But I'll never call you monster either, because you're both. You're everything terrible and everything kind that humans can be, and I have to live with that. So you're going to live with it too. Outside, snow had begun to fall, the first snow of winter, covering Brooklyn's streets in temporary mercy, making everything clean and new for a moment, before the dirt showed through. Anna stood on the sidewalk, breathing the cold air, feeling the weight of 3 countries, 2 families, and one impossible choice settling into her bones. Behind her, in the apartment, Hartley collapsed at the table, his head in his hands, finally allowing himself to break completely. And somewhere in the space between punishment and mercy, justice found its imperfect shape. Spring came to Brooklyn like a rumor of hope, and Anna spent the months after confrontation learning how to live with divided loyalty and fractured truth. She'd found work at a small translation service in Manhattan, German to English, mostly legal documents and immigration papers for the thousands of displaced persons still flooding into America, searching for family, rebuilding lives from fragments. The irony wasn't lost on her, helping others piece together lost identities while her own remained split down the middle. March 12, 1947, arrived with unseasonable warmth and the smell of earth waking. Anna climbed the stairs to Hartley's apartment at exactly 9 o'clock in the morning, the hour her father had died, the hour her mother had begun her final interrogation. She found Hartley waiting at the kitchen table, sober for the first time in weeks, a pot of coffee brewing, 2 cups set out like an offering or a treaty. He'd aged a decade in 3 months. His hair had gone fully gray, and his hands shook slightly as he poured. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly. Anna sat across from him, the same table where they'd shared breakfast 1,000 times before she knew the truth. Now it felt like sitting across from history itself, something that demanded acknowledgement, but could never be fully reconciled. "Tell me," she said. "Everything. From the beginning." And so he did. For 4 hours, Hartley recounted every detail of March 12, 1945. The smell of the interrogation room, disinfectant and fear. The sound of Matthias's breathing, labored and wet, as his body failed. The way Helene's hands had trembled when they brought Anna into the room. The exact words he'd used, the tone of voice, the clinical precision with which he'd applied pressure until a human being broke. He didn't spare himself, didn't soften the edges or frame it as necessary evil, just laid it out, raw and terrible, while Anna listened and let the truth carve new scars over old ones. "The worst part," Hartley said as noon sun streamed through the windows, "was how easy it became. By the time I pulled the trigger, I felt nothing, just relief that it was over, that I could file the paperwork and move on. It wasn't until I looked at you, sitting there in shock, covered in your mother's blood, that I felt anything at all." "What did you feel?" "Recognition." His voice was barely audible. "I saw myself, what I'd become, what I'd let them make me. And I knew if I walked away from you, if I filed you as another casualty and went back to the war, I'd be lost forever. Already was lost. But maybe if I could save one person from what I'd done, I wasn't yours to save. I know." They sat in silence, the weight of unchangeable history pressing down. Finally, Anna spoke. "Elizabeth Schmidt died last month, pneumonia. She was working at a displaced persons camp outside Munich, taking care of children nobody wanted. I got a letter from the Red Cross." Hartley closed his eyes. "I'm sorry. She left me something in her will, a box of items she'd kept from Ravensbrück, small things prisoners had given her for safekeeping, photographs, letters, jewelry, things the SS would have confiscated or destroyed." Anna pulled a small package from her bag, including this. She unwrapped a silver locket, tarnished but intact. Inside were 2 tiny photographs. Matthias holding a newborn Anna, his face radiant with joy. Helene singing at what looked like a cabaret, her mouth open in song, her eyes alive with passion. My mother wore this. Every day, according to Elizabeth. Even in the camp, she kept it hidden, refused to trade it for food or medicine. It was the only thing she asked Elizabeth to save, if anything happened to her. Hartley stared at the photographs like they were accusation and absolution both. "They look happy," he whispered. They were. Until you. The words landed like stones, but Anna's voice held no venom. Just fact. Just truth. "I've been thinking," Anna continued, "about what VERHÖR told me in Texas, about how you volunteered for the interrogation, how you chose to be the one to break them. I told you why. You told me the reason you gave yourself, but I don't think that's the whole truth." She leaned forward, her eyes sharp. "I think you knew, somewhere in the part of you that was still human, that if you destroyed them, you'd have to answer for it. That their daughter would become your constant reminder. That you'd never be able to forget or compartmentalize or move on." Hartley's face crumpled. "Yes. You didn't just want to test if you were still human. You wanted to punish yourself. You wanted to make sure you'd never have peace again. Yes. So every morning when you made me breakfast, every night when you tucked me in, every birthday and Christmas and ordinary Tuesday, you were crucifying yourself on the altar of your guilt, and I was the cross you built." The recognition hit Hartley like a physical blow. He bent forward, hands covering his face, shoulders shaking with sobs he'd held for 2 years. Anna watched him break, feeling nothing and everything simultaneously. This was justice, maybe. Not legal punishment or public exposure, but the slow, daily torture of living with irredeemable truth. "I hate you," she said quietly, "for killing them, for stealing my childhood, for making me love you while building my life on their graves. I hate you so completely that sometimes I can't breathe through it." Hartley nodded, unable to speak. "But I understand you. And understanding is almost worse than hate, because now I can't see you as simply evil. You're just broken. We're all just broken people breaking each other, trying to survive in a world that demanded we become monsters to prove we weren't." She stood, moved to the window where spring sun turned Brooklyn golden. "My Uncle VERHÖR is building missiles now. Weapons that can cross oceans, level cities, kill thousands in seconds. He tells himself it's defense, that he's protecting America from the Soviets, that his work has purpose. But he knows, we both know, he's just building better ways to destroy. That's his penance. That's how he lives with what his defection cost." Anna turned back to Hartley. And Elizabeth spent her last year caring for orphans nobody wanted, children broken by war and displacement, trying to save a few when she couldn't save the many. That was her penance. She picked up the locket, fastened it around her neck. "This is mine. Carrying their memory while acknowledging your love. Hating you while understanding you. Living between two truths that can never be reconciled." "What do I do?" Hartley's voice was raw, desperate. "How do I live with this?" "You already know. You live with it the way you've been living with it. Badly, painfully, with whiskey and nightmares and the knowledge that nothing you do will ever be enough. That's not punishment. That's just consequence." Anna gathered her things, preparing to leave. But at the door, she paused. "Next year, same time, I'll come back. And you'll tell me again, every detail, every choice. And the year after that. And the year after that. Until one of us dies. That's the deal. I'll be here." "I know." She descended the stairs, past Mrs. Steinberg's apartment where the old woman was baking something that smelled like childhood. past the loose step Hartley had never fixed, out into Brooklyn Spring where cherry blossoms were just beginning to open. At the corner, Anna stopped at a small Catholic church she'd passed 1,000 times but never entered. Inside, the air was cool and dim, smelling of incense and old wood. She lit 2 candles, one for Matthias Vogel, one for Helene Vogel, and knelt in the pew, though she wasn't Catholic, wasn't sure she believed in anything anymore, except the stubborn persistence of memory. "I'm going to live," she whispered to the flickering flames. "I'm going to be brave like you said. I'm going to love and work and maybe someday have children of my own who'll never know about interrogation rooms or displaced persons or the weight of impossible choices." The candles burned steadily. "But I'll never forget you. Never stop honoring what you sacrificed. And when people ask about my family, I'll tell them the truth. All of it. Even the parts that make them uncomfortable. Because you deserve to be remembered as you were. Good people who made me through love. Not the casualties of someone else's guilt." She sat in the church for an hour, watching light move across the stations of the cross, thinking about betrayal and redemption, and whether any of it mattered in the face of simple survival. Outside, Brooklyn continued its daily resurrection. Children played stickball in the streets. Women hung laundry that snapped like flags in the spring wind. Men returned from work, carrying lunch pails and newspapers, their faces showing the 1,000 small compromises required to live in a world that had recently tried to destroy itself. Anna joined the flow of ordinary life, carrying her extraordinary grief like everyone else carried theirs, hidden beneath the surface, visible only to those who knew how to look. That night, she wrote 2 letters. One to VERHÖR in Texas, telling him she understood his choices even if she couldn't forgive them. That family was more complicated than bloodlines, that she hoped his American children grew up never knowing the cost of their father's freedom. The other to the military tribunal investigating war crimes. Not about Hartley. That was her burden to carry, her justice to dispense. But about other interrogators, other crimes, other families destroyed by men who convinced themselves that brutality in service of intelligence was somehow noble. She couldn't save her parents, couldn't undo what had been done. But she could make sure someone bore witness. Someone said, "This happened, and it was wrong. And the dead deserve acknowledgement even if justice comes too late." The letters went out in the morning mail, and Anna felt something shift inside her. Not healing, but perhaps the beginning of learning how to carry wounds without letting them define everything. Some debts can never be repaid. Some crimes can never be forgiven. But witness was possible. Memory was possible. The stubborn insistence on truth, even when truth brought no comfort, was possible. And for now, in the spring of 1947, that would have to be enough. 23 years later, on a cold March morning in 1970, Anna Hartley, she'd kept the name, another complicated truth, stood in a cemetery in Queens, watching them lower Captain Thomas Hartley into ground that had no right to hold him. The funeral was small. Mrs. Steinberg, now 90 and frail but insistent on attending. A handful of veterans from Hartley's unit who remembered him as a good officer, a competent interrogator, a man who came back from the war changed like they all did. And Anna's daughter, 7-year-old Sophie, holding her mother's hand and asking quiet questions about the grandfather she'd met only twice. "Why didn't Grandpa Tom visit more?" Sophie whispered, as the priest intoned prayers neither of them believed. "Because some people carry weights that make traveling difficult," Anna replied. It was the truth, if not the whole truth. How do you explain to a child that her grandfather had been both her great-grandparents' murderer and her mother's devoted father. That love and cruelty could wear the same face, speak the same language, exist in the same heart without contradiction. Hartley had kept his promise. Every March 12th for 23 years, Anna had climbed those stairs, and he'd recounted every detail of that day in Ravensbrück. The ritual had become something almost sacred. Not forgiveness, not absolution, but acknowledgement, witness. The refusal to let horror be forgotten simply because remembering was painful. The last time, 3 weeks ago, he'd been skeletal, liver finally failing from decades of whiskey and guilt. But his mind had been clear, his memory sharp, and he'd told the story one final time with the precision of a man who'd spent 23 years ensuring he'd never forget a single detail. "I'm ready," he'd said when the story was finished. "I've carried it long enough." "You don't get absolution," Anna had replied, as she always did. "I know, but maybe I get rest." Now, watching the coffin descend, Anna felt the complicated knot of her grief, mourning not the man who'd killed her parents, but the man who'd held her through nightmares, taught her to ride a bicycle, walked her down the aisle at her wedding to Michael, a good man who knew the whole story and loved her anyway. Both men were real. Both men were true. And she'd spent her adult life learning to hold both truths without letting either one erase the other. After the funeral, back at her apartment in Manhattan, purposefully chosen to be far from Brooklyn, far from the scenes of her fractured childhood, Anna opened the box Hartley's lawyer had delivered the week before, his final effects, his last communication. Inside, the wooden bird, which she'd given back to him years ago during one of their March meetings. The journal from Ravensbrück, every page a catalogue of sins. Her mother's identity card, worn soft from handling, and a letter, sealed, addressed simply to Anneliese. She opened it with shaking hands. "Dear Anneliese, if you're reading this, I'm finally free of the weight I've carried since March 1945. I don't expect you to mourn me. Don't expect you to remember me kindly. But I need you to know some things before I'm gone. I never stopped loving you. From the moment I held you in that infirmary, through every nightmare and every breakfast and every impossible conversation on March 12th, I loved you as completely as I was capable of loving anything. That love was built on horror, I know, built on the murder of the parents who should have raised you. But it was real, broken, guilty, insufficient, but real. I've left everything to you. It's not much. The apartment building in Brooklyn, some savings, my military pension. I know you don't want it. No, you'd rather burn it than accept anything from me, but I'm asking you to take it anyway. Not for yourself, but for Sophie. She deserves a grandfather's inheritance, even if her grandfather was a war criminal. She deserves to not be punished for my sins. And maybe you can use the money to do what I never could. Make something good from something terrible. There's one more thing in the box. A recording. I made it last year when I knew I was dying. It's my full confession, every interrogation, every death, every crime I committed in the name of intelligence gathering. Not just your parents, but all of them. 17 prisoners total. 17 families destroyed. I'm giving it to you to do with what you want. Turn it over to the military tribunal. Give it to the press. Use it to finally expose what Operation Paperclip really cost. How we brought Nazi scientists to America while burying the bodies of those we murdered to find them. Or burn it. Let the dead stay dead. Let my crimes die with me. The choice is yours. It always should have been. I don't ask for forgiveness. Don't ask you to remember me as anything but what I was, a man who did unforgivable things and spent the rest of his life failing to atone for them. But know this: Matthias and Helene Vogel were brave, good people who loved you more than survival. They died protecting you, and in some sick, twisted way, their sacrifice kept me human enough to raise you with gentleness instead of cruelty. They saved you twice, once by dying for you, and once by giving me a reason to stay alive. Live well. Love your daughter the way they would have loved you, the way I tried to love you. And when you tell her about her family history, because I know you will, you're too honest not to. Tell her that people are complicated, that we're all capable of great love and great harm, that the line between hero and monster is thinner than anyone wants to believe. With love and shame and gratitude, Thomas Hartley Anna read the letter 3 times, tears streaming, while Sophie played in the next room, humming a song Anna recognized as one of the German lullabies Hartley had learned 30 years ago, passed down now to another generation, like an heirloom that carried both blessing and curse. She found the recording at the bottom of the box, a reel-to-reel tape, carefully labeled. 4 hours of confession. 4 hours of truth that could rewrite history, expose corruption, demand justice for families who'd waited decades for acknowledgement. Or 4 hours that could stay silent. Let the dead rest. Let Sophie grow up without the burden of knowing her grandfather's full horror. Anna held the tape in one hand, her mother's locket in the other, feeling the weight of impossible choice settle on her shoulders the way it had settled on Helene Vogel's shoulders in an interrogation room 25 years ago. What would you do? She thought about Matthias, who'd chosen resistance over family safety, about Helene, who'd chosen betrayal over watching her daughter die, about Werner, who'd chosen comfortable guilt over uncomfortable honor, about Elizabeth, who'd chosen witness over silence, about Hartley, who'd chosen penance over peace. And she thought about Sophie, who deserved to inherit more than shame and secrets, who deserved a world where truth wasn't buried for comfort, where accountability mattered even when it came too late. Anna made her decision. The New York Times published the first excerpt on March 12, 1971, the 26th anniversary of her parents' death. War crimes hidden in plain sight, a soldier's confession. Ran across 3 pages, with Hartley's recordings providing the evidence and Anna's testimony providing the context. The story detonated like the missiles Werner was building in Texas. Military tribunals were reopened. Operation Paperclip was investigated. Families who'd waited decades for acknowledgement finally got their due, though it came too late for justice, only for memory. Anna testified before Congress, holding Sophie's hand, telling the story of how intelligence gathering became murder, how guilt became adoption, how love and horror braided together until they were indistinguishable. Some called her brave. Others called her a traitor for exposing American war crimes. Werner stopped speaking to her, afraid the investigation would reach him, would expose his own compromises and crimes. Anna didn't care. She'd chosen witness, chosen truth over comfort, accountability over silence, the possibility that Sophie's generation might learn from the sins of previous ones. It didn't heal anything, didn't bring her parents back, didn't erase the childhood built on lies, or the love she'd felt for the man who destroyed her first family to create a second one. But it was something. It was acknowledgement. It was refusal to let horror be forgotten simply because remembering was painful. On March 13th, 1971, 26 years to the day after Hartley adopted her, Anna took Sophie to the Catholic church in Brooklyn, where she'd lit candles decades before. They lit 4 candles this time. "This one is for your great-grandfather, Matthias," Anna explained, her voice steady. "A violinist who chose to save strangers and died for it." Sophie carefully lit the candle, her young face serious. "This one is for your great-grandmother Helene, a singer who loved her daughter more than principles, more than honor, more than everything." Another flame joined the first. "This one is for Grandpa Tom, who did terrible things and spent his life failing to make them right, but who loved us anyway." The third candle flickered to life. "And this one," Anna said softly, "is for all the families who were broken by war, by choices impossible to make well, by the stubborn human insistence on survival even when survival costs everything." 4 flames burned steadily in the dim church. "Mama," Sophie asked, "are they all in heaven together now?" Anna looked at her daughter, this child who carried the genes of musicians and the inheritance of a war criminal, who would grow up knowing the full truth and having to make sense of it herself. "I don't know, sweetheart. I hope so. I hope heaven is big enough to hold people who hurt each other and loved each other, who failed and tried, who did unforgivable things and spent their lives carrying the weight. I hope there's room for all of us, despite everything." Sophie nodded, satisfied with the ambiguity the way children sometimes are, understanding that some questions don't have clean answers. They sat in the pew for an hour, watching light move across the stained glass, and Anna felt something she hadn't felt in 26 years. Not peace exactly, but perhaps the possibility of it. The sense that witness and memory and stubborn truth-telling might be enough to build on, might be the foundation for Sophie's generation to do better, choose better, remember better. Outside, March snow began to fall, the last snow of winter before spring arrived. It covered Brooklyn in temporary grace, making everything clean and new for a moment, promising that beginnings were still possible, even after endings, that life would insist on itself despite everything. Anna and Sophie emerged into the snow, hand in hand, carrying their complicated inheritance. Love and horror, truth and mercy, the knowledge that people are impossibly complex, and that holding that complexity without collapsing under its weight is the only honest way to live. Some debts can never be repaid. Some crimes can never be forgiven. Some stories have no clean ending. But they have witness. They have memory. They have the stubborn insistence that the dead deserve acknowledgement and the living deserve truth. And on cold March mornings, when snow falls like grace on a broken world, that witness becomes a kind of prayer, not for forgiveness, but for the courage to remember, the strength to carry what can't be fixed, and the hope that the next generation might inherit wisdom instead of wounds. The wooden bird Anna's father carved sat on her mantel now, next to a photograph of Hartley holding infant, Anna with the expression of a man who'd found salvation and damnation in the same small face. Both were true, both mattered, both deserved remembering. Sophie would grow up knowing all of it, would make her own peace with the contradictions, would carry the story forward into whatever future waited. And the candles would burn year after year, testimony that some truths refuse silence, some loves survive horror, and some families are built not from blood alone, but from the shared determination to witness what was, acknowledge what is, and hope for what might yet be. To this day, historians debate the true extent of Operation Paperclip's human cost, And some say that on quiet March nights in Brooklyn, you can still hear a man's voice singing German lullabies to a child who should never have needed his comfort. A ghost apologizing forever to the family he destroyed and the daughter he tried to save. If this story moved you, if it made you think about the impossible choices we face and the complicated truths we carry, leave a comment. Share it with someone who needs to hear that healing doesn't always mean forgetting, that justice sometimes looks like witness, and that love, broken, guilty, insufficient, is still love. And subscribe, because the stories that matter most are the ones that refuse simple answers and easy comfort. The ones that insist we look at the full truth, no matter how hard it is to hold.